Thank you everyone for joining us this evening. I'm going to share my screen now and begin our presentation for tonight's meeting. Time's moving fast. I've almost got to think to myself, is this the right one? Is it really November 17th? And in fact, it is. And so I want to start out by welcoming everyone to our November 17th VISD Bond Planning Task Force meeting. Again, for any of those who may be fairly new to the process and may be watching this down the line on our VISD YouTube channel, we do have that Bond Task Force link where you can find all the information for facility assessments that have been done, the work of the task force, all the presentations and videos of every meeting that has taken place. To our task force, again, can't say thank you enough for your efforts up to this point and your continued work tonight and moving forward in our process. Appreciate the diligence and continued commitment. This is certainly a large undertaking for us as a school district, and we appreciate all the value that you are bringing to us in this process. Quick overview of our agenda for today. Our topics will include a brief recap of our November 2nd meeting, follow-up information items from questions that have come to us during or since the last meeting. We'll address additional bond and tax rate scenarios that were asked of us at the conclusion of the last meeting we held. We'll revisit the priority items. Mike Vermeeren from Huckabee Architects will provide information on cost estimates for major renovations or replacements of campuses that were discussed where the task force asked for more specific information to be brought forward. And then we will have opportunity for small group discussion around that information and large group discussion as well to help us and move in our direction forward. So our meeting 4 recap. We, in our last meeting, had homework share out. You know, one of the things that we ask our task force to do is to help us in that outreach to our community. Each one of you is uniquely connected to others in our community. And so as a part of that last meeting, we asked you to go out and share with your sphere of influence and let people know about some of the new and innovative things that are happening in the school district around our pathways at the elementary and middle school specifically. And we also asked you to share out around feedback you received about the conversations that have been taking place regarding facility needs. Last week, we provided some follow-up information in terms of tax rate history. We discussed that the district's tax rate is at its lowest point. I showed you a graph last week of the last 21 years. Francis and I did a little further research. That was just what we could fit on the screen. It's actually the school district's tax rate is at its lowest rate since 1992. So I'd ask for you to just think for a second where you were in 1992. I was a junior at Hallettsville High School. Last time the VISD tax rate was as low as it is now, or lower. We had discussions around priority items and potential cost estimates for those what were identified as high and moderate priority items. We had time for small group discussion and share out. And we also took a task force pulse check. And so put a copy of that here for the group. As a reminder, we asked that question to help us know how to move forward in bringing forth information in prioritization process, which statement best aligned with task force members' current viewpoint. From I think it's important we maintain the existing INS rate, even if it means we are not able to address some priority items at this time. 9% of the task force expressed that that was their current viewpoint. 77% said, I think we should consider the possibility of an increase in the INS tax rate and would like to see additional tax rate scenarios. if required, to address all projects ultimately identified by this task force. So that's a part of what we'll be doing tonight, is bringing you some of that additional information. And then 18% of this group said, I'm not sure and I need more information, and asked for more information specific to cost estimates for renovation or rebuild of some of these identified campuses that the task force discussed. And so that information will be brought forward to you tonight as well. In terms of follow-up information items, the first one that we have to share with you, last week, we showed you a graph of school district tax rates, and we were looking at those school districts that are most similar in size to VISD. So they had enrollments of around 13 to 14,000 students, somewhere in that vicinity. And we saw among those similarly sized school districts that VISD was certainly at the lower end of the tax rate. There have also been questions about how we compare to area school district tax rates. And so we've listed school districts, I think just about every road that leads out of Victoria in every direction. The first or second school district that you come across, ones you commonly hear about if you live in the greater Victoria area, we've listed those here. You know, part of what we want to make sure people are aware of is sometimes we hear that our tax rate is as high as it's ever been. Of course, we've shared data to show that that's certainly not the case. The other thing we hear is that our taxes are higher than any other school district around. And so again, we want to have conversations and make decisions based on accurate information. So here you can see VISD is highlighted in yellow, our tax rate, which we've discussed before. And then you can see those school districts that surround us and where their tax rates are currently for the 2020-2021 school year. Another thing that we wanted to bring additional information to the task force on is it's common that we hear about how the district utilizes its budget and how that budget is or is not prioritized to address maintenance needs. We've heard that in community conversations. We've heard that here within task force conversations over the last 2 months. So I'm going to provide a few slides to just break down what is that general operating budget, the maintenance and operating budget. What you see in this pie chart here, and this will look quite familiar to some of our task force members who have previously served on our TRE task force or even on our efficiency and resource management task forces in prior years. Those folks have had the opportunity to see information that shares that the vast majority, approximately 80%, and this current year, 81% of our general fund, maintenance and operation fund, is dedicated to payroll and benefits. So the salaries and the benefit, health insurance costs, and so on and so forth for staff. That's where 81% of the maintenance and operations budget goes to support. The smaller piece of the pie, 19%, is all other operational expenses across the district. And so if you are not familiar with school district budgeting and finance, you may look at that and you may be in another line of work or another line of business and say, gosh, 81% is a really large amount of your general operating budget. And that's a large amount to go specifically to payroll and benefits of your staff. And that may be true in certain industries. For those who have participated on some of those prior task forces, you are also aware that despite the fact that currently the district commits 81% of our operational budget to staff pay and benefits, market analysis shows that we are still behind in competitiveness of pay across all categories of employees in the district. And so I thought it would be important for this group, especially those who haven't served previously and seen information, to understand when we look at similarly sized school districts, And if you had that initial reaction of, wow, 81% towards payroll and benefits sounds like a large percentage, here's where VISD stands in comparison to those similarly sized school districts that we've previously looked at, those closest to student enrollment with us. And all of them fall within a very narrow range of slightly above 80% to around 85%. And that's true for us, but it's actually also true for the vast majority of school districts that are smaller and larger than us too. It tends to be that around 80%, somewhere between 80 and 85% of the general fund goes to support pay and benefits of staff. And again, even though we commit 4 out of $5 of our operating budget to that, we still recognize that we are behind in terms of competitiveness of pay. That's something that's been addressed here in our task force and previously. I want to step back because the real purpose of this is to talk about tonight that other 19% and to address what is in fact an inaccurate narrative that we have heard repeatedly, that the district does not spend resources to try to maintain our facilities. So again, we're going to be looking at this 19% of the pie here on the top part of the screen in this next visual. So this 100% pie is actually representative of that other 19%, all of the district's resources after paying benefits and payroll for staff. And here's where that money goes. The largest portion of the pie, as we would expect, and we'd like more to go toward, is instruction and instruction-related services. 34% of that 19% goes there. The second largest piece of the pie, 30%, almost a third of what we have to prioritize outside of pay and benefits, goes to facilities, maintenance, and operations. Almost a third. Now you look at those other categories, and we know we have to have transportation and extracurricular and security and data processes, student support services. We have to have all of those. Those are expected and needed to support our students and a successful school district. Again, what I want to make sure we reiterate here, and what I would ask the task force to help us in communicating, is that when we hear that the school district doesn't spend its resources to address facility needs, it's just wholly inaccurate. In fact, almost a third of what is available from the remaining portion of our funds on a yearly basis is going toward facilities, maintenance, and operations. Now I want to take a moment to talk about the data pieces on this slide. What we are looking at here is, in school districts, when you look at your budgets, they're within what are called functions. And so one of our functions is specific to instruction. Another function is specific to facility maintenance and operations. When you look at VISD's costs and the functions that have had the highest percentage increase in spending from 2016 to 2019 in our operating fund, the function that has the highest increase over that period of time is facilities, maintenance, and operations. Over 16% increase in costs in facility maintenance and operations from 2016 to our most recent completed budget year, 2019. That 16% equates to $1.945 million in additional spending in 2019 versus in 2016. So as you can see here, over that time period, the cost for maintaining and operating our facilities, particularly those which are aged, And we recognize that we have 15 facilities that are 50 plus years old, just specifically campuses. 9 of those are over 60 years old. It's not surprising that the maintenance costs are rising and that the percentage is growing at the rate that it is. Again, sharing this data with you and asking that you help us as we hear that narrative that the school district doesn't dedicate funds to maintaining its facilities. It's simply wholly inaccurate. Another piece of information that was requested by the task force last week was to provide additional tax rate scenarios. So I want to start with what has been provided to the group up to this point as a baseline. Our financial advisors shared that at our current INS fund rate, we're looking at the bottom line of this table here, our current INS fund rate of 0.2235, that it could generate anywhere from $72 million on a 20-year amortization bond up to $99.5 million on a 29-year amortization bond. This is not new information. This is information that was shared with this task force at a prior meeting, but I wanted to start with that baseline of funds that are estimated that could be generated without increasing the INS tax rate. What we're sharing with you here are projections for the funds that could be generated at various increases as requested by the task force. At a 1 cent tax rate impact, so increasing the INS fund, we're looking at this top table here, the bottom line, 0.2335. That's a 1 cent INS tax rate increase. And then you'll see the values that can be generated at 20, 25, and 29 years. To simplify this, because there's a lot of numbers involved here, basically at each penny increment of increase, it's generating slightly over $7 million in funds. So at a 1 cent tax rate impact, if you look on the far right at the 29-year amortization, it's $106,875,000. If we go down to the second table, here we're reflecting a 2 cent tax rate impact. So an INS fund rate of 0.2435, 2 cents higher than the current INS rate. And again, at each of those various scenarios, 20, 25, and 29-year amortization, you're seeing an increase of a little more than $7 million in capacity. Again, I want to point out at the bottom here, you can see that these are based on assumptions. They're based on an assumption of no taxable assessed value growth. That's a conservative estimate. They're based on interest rates plus 100 basis points based on the time frame out to which potential bonds might be sold, at a tax rate collection of 98%, which is near what our typical tax rate collection is on the INS side. And here we see 2 additional scenarios at a 3 cent rate impact, and then at the bottom at a 4 cent rate impact. Again, every penny is generating a little more, about $7.3 million. So at 3 cents, it's anywhere from 94.2 million at a 20-year amortization up to, on the far right-hand side, a 29-year amortization of 121,605,000. And then at the 4 cent tax rate impact, up to a maximum if 29-year amortization were figured in at 128,975. So we didn't do additional scenarios beyond 4 cents. We could certainly project based on this information that every penny increase is resulting in approximately $7.3 million in additional capacity. We also asked our financial advisors to project the monthly tax rate impact for home values after exemptions are taken into consideration. And so we'll start on the far left-hand side. You've got 3 different home values here: a $100,000 home, a $150,000 home, and a $200,000 home. In that second column, under no tax rate impact, of course, it would make sense that if we don't change the tax rate, that's a 0 cent impact. At 1 cent, someone in a $100,000 home would experience an 83-cent increase per month. A $200,000 homeowner would experience a $1.67 per month increase in their property tax. And then I'll just take you to the far right-hand side rather than read through every number. At a 4 cent tax rate impact, a $100,000 homeowner would experience $3.33 per month increase in their property tax. A $200,000 homeowner would experience $6.67 per month. We checked with the Victoria County Appraisal District to verify the current average home value in Victoria, and it is $168,540. Next, we want to just briefly revisit the priority items and potential cost estimates that were previously discussed. In our initial meeting, where we brought forth to the task force some internal district identified high priority and moderate priority items, we had discussions with the task force about those items, and the task force asked us to move a few of the moderate priority items over to the high priority side. And so we did that and presented that information at our last task force meeting. We were also asked by members of the task force to look at what the costs of playgrounds at the elementary would be estimated to be. And so we have added those amounts under additional task force identified priorities, should the task force wish to discuss those moving forward. Earlier today, I sent all of the task force members a PDF attachment that included every campus and facility that we have discussed as a part of the facility assessment. And included in that attachment was a breakdown per campus or per facility of line item estimated costs. So in our last meeting, when we looked at an overall value, and this is an example of Allo, and it's not intended for us to walk through this line by line right now, but at Allo, if we said that the overall high priority items were estimated to cost $2.9 million, below that it's giving a value for how those numbers were determined. 888,000 of that I can see is related to HVAC unit replacement and HVAC controls. So there's that breakdown. That is, again, at the request of one of our task force members in the last meeting, that we provide a line item breakdown of those estimated costs. So you should now have access to those per facility that's been discussed. Again, this is a whole lot of data on this slide. We covered the majority of this data in our last meeting. I do want to note a few things about the data. One is that we've added, I'm going to call it orange, a line item that says additional. That's in relation to the request for costs for playgrounds at the elementary. We've also moved those values that were moderate priority that were requested by the task force to be placed in high priority. Those are represented in the high priority items. If you go back and you compare the values that we presented last week, or 2 weeks ago actually, to the values that we are showing you tonight, you're going to, in some cases, see slight differentiations in those costs. Part of that is as estimates are being dialed in, and this is a continuous process. Part of what you have to consider is the time frame during which you think work may be able to occur. And you've got to factor in potential escalation of cost based on when that time frame is estimated to occur. So you will see some slight fluctuations in some of those values in either direction. But if you look back and you say, hey, this doesn't match that, those are some of the reasons why they may not match identically as we move through this process. Again, here are those potential costs by campus for the secondary level and the support facilities. And then we looked at that overall total for high priority, moderate priority, and additional priority, which is specifically the playgrounds at every elementary. And again, those numbers have shifted slightly in the categories of high, moderate, and total based on movement of priorities and also based on continued estimation of those costs based on time frame. One of the things that was requested from our task force members last week or 2 weeks ago was for us to work with Huckabee Architects to cost estimate major renovations and cost estimate replacements for campuses. These were the campuses that were discussed, and so these are the campuses that additional information is being brought forward regarding tonight. Specifically, the elementary campuses of Hopkins, Shields, and Smith were identified by task force members for additional information because they are a part of our innovative programming that's going to be coming forward at those campuses. Similarly, at the middle school, Patti, Welder, and Stroman were requested for additional information regarding renovation and or rebuild based on that change in programming. Mission Valley was identified by the task force because of the percentage cost to renovate versus estimations for rebuild, and because it's 83 years old. I've got 3 things starred at the bottom of this page on the right that I want to discuss with the task force, and I'm going to ask, guys, I know I've been talking for a long time, and if I was a teacher, I am a teacher. When I was a classroom teacher, I would have stopped by now and had some interaction. So I'm going to ask that if I've lost you for a second, that hopefully me asking you this will regain any attention I may have lost. There's some important things to note when I turn this over to Mike in a moment and we start talking about estimated costs for renovation or rebuild. Important things to note in here. One is in regard to capacity. There was some discussion in our last bond planning meeting about capacity of elementary, and if we were going to rebuild an elementary, would we rebuild it at the current size? Most of our elementaries are somewhere in a capacity of 500 to 600. Or would we rebuild, if we were going to rebuild, at a capacity that would be more in line with the size of elementaries that are typically being built today in school districts of our size for efficiency purposes? In these estimates, you are going to see capacities of 800 for those elementaries, uh, Hopkins, Shields, and Smith. Because we are asking for Huckabee to bring forward an estimation of a larger sized capacity elementary, you can imagine that's going to correspond with a larger cost for renovation or rebuild than if we were to renovate or rebuild to the same capacity as the current campus. There's a few things that as an administrative team, as a leadership team, we would want this task force to know from a leadership mindset. One, these campuses, with the exception of Mission Valley, these campuses are campuses where we have unique, innovative programming coming. And as a part of that initiative, there is the plan that not only would students who currently reside within that zone to attend those campuses have access to that campus, but that parents whose students would like to pursue programming that's STEM related, that's blended learning related, have the opportunity to be considered to attend those campuses with that specialized programming as well. That's one reason for the capacity to be considered at a what is today a more common capacity for elementaries. Additionally, as we've discussed previously with this task force, we are not only here to discuss short-term addressing of facilities, but also mid and long-range planning for facilities. And so part of what we heard from the group last week, 2 weeks ago, was that we need to be thoughtful about the size of these campuses and the efficiency of the campuses. And so should the district, this task force, the community support a larger elementary, it provides the opportunity in the mid-range and long-range planning to revisit how we operate and the number of campuses that we operate. Also included as a part of this process for estimating costs have been conversations between Huckabee Architects and our campus leadership teams. So they've met with our campus principals. They've met with our director of innovation. They've discussed the unique programming that's coming to these campuses. And if we were going to design renovation or rebuild of a facility, what is believed to be needed space to best serve those programs. And so that is also a part of the process that's taken place up to this point since our last task force meeting in order to create estimates around renovation or rebuild of these potential campuses. And before I turn it over to Mike, I just want to reiterate that this is a planning process, that all the information that we're bringing forward is a part of a process, and the information we're bringing forward is an estimation that can continue to be refined, and nothing's happening without the recommendation of this task force. With that, Mike, I'd like to turn it over to you, sir.
You bet. Thank you very much. So adding to that, part of when we look at these campuses and start to develop estimates for them, we're looking at what does it cost to do a new school that would replace what you have there, and we're also looking at what would it cost to do renovations / additions to them. And in both scenarios, what we're really trying to do, as Dr. Bonewald was alluding to, is plan for campuses that will actually meet those goals of the education pathways that you want to introduce into those campuses. That's going to be largely different from the mindset of how those campuses were originally designed 40, 50, 60, 80 years ago. So that's something to keep in mind. And so what we wanted to do is put a list here, a bulleted list of some of the top priority goals that we had when we were talking about the plans that you might have for these campuses. So what you see here, number one, enclosing the campuses, and that was that stems from a conversation we had when we were interviewing the principals at all of the campuses. There are several, in most, where you have to go outside to get to certain places, either other classrooms or gymnasiums, but largely the campuses are not enclosed, and so that's a safety and security element that we want to address if you were to move forward with any kind of design. A new front entrance and improved street presence. That was something that had come up. A lot of the campuses, again, it's based on age. But the front entrance being more prominent and kind of giving, the community, the building itself serving as a sign, that this is where an elementary school is, this is where a middle school is, and we're proud of it, and providing that street presence for the students as well. Improved drop-off and pickup drives where necessary. So taking a look at that on many of the campuses, there are short drive aisles that might back up into the streets at drop off and pickup, or can simply just be more efficient. And when you do additions or renovations to a site, a lot of times you might have to impact those, and so we have the opportunity to make those more efficient. Core spaces. So this is kind of the identity of a campus, but within it, you may see it from the outside, you may see it from the inside, but if you're a student, it certainly resonates, with you when you have those core spaces like your cafeteria and your library, serving as kind of a node for the campus, making sure that they're large enough to accommodate future capacities, and they're flexible in use, right? They're not just cafeterias that sit empty for 3/4 of the day. How can we actually build new square footage and where it's actually used for learning as well, so you're being as efficient as you possibly can with the money that you put into these renovations. Incorporate grade level neighborhoods and collaboration space. This is very much the current trend of education and educational environments in which grade level neighborhoods like first grade is kind of designed around each other, as opposed to the old way of having your classroom wings, if you will, and after time they kind of get separated, where you might have first and second grade in one wing, and then second actually needs to bleed into the next wing, and they're largely disconnected. And so trying to provide that connection and the ability for those neighborhoods to collaborate with each other in the floor or in the space. So that's something that is, again, helping the education, the learning experience for the students within it. We're trying to focus on that. The pathway, appropriate learning environment. So larger classroom sizes, Dr. Bonewell was alluding to this as well. Having talked with the campus leadership team, you got to figure, we're talking about blended learning and we're talking about STEM, and that education, that learning style, the way that it's delivered to students, has an impact both within the four walls of a classroom, and it also has an impact on wanting to break out of those classrooms and have larger space to collaborate. So either way, you need a little bit more, what I like to just say is elbow room within those classrooms. And something else to keep in mind too is that when you're doing things like, when you're introducing collaboration into your learning, one of the top things that people focus on first is furniture, and making furniture mobile so it's easier to collaborate and you're not dragging around clunky desks to work at. What happens with that is when you're moving around and your furniture is mobile, people always complain about the classrooms being too small. Nobody ever says, well, the furniture is too big, or the furniture is moving around. Again, you kind of need to provide that elbow room for that. So teacher planning and resource spaces. Again, providing the spaces that allow teachers to actually facilitate that type of teaching, so the students can learn in this new way. And then considering the impact to learning environment during construction. I think that it's very likely at some of the campuses there will be, if you were to do even new construction, but certainly with renovations, there would be phasing involved. And so one thing that we tried to consider is how could you possibly do renovations or new construction in a way that it, with the least impact to students while that's going on. And so we have these charts here for each campus, and I'll walk you through it. On the top right corner, or top left corner, I apologize, is kind of a reminder of the ages of the campuses. It's something to keep in mind while we're looking at the proposed amount of renovation or additions that we're showing. So down that left column, you'll see we have scope, the capacity we're trying to design for, the potential cost, and I should go back. I shouldn't use the word design really, because we're not designing really. It's simply planning and programming. And so I just want to point that out. So we have capacity there, the number of students, the potential cost, right? And then the percent of new build cost. So if you were to do the prioritized repair that we've talked about in the past several meetings, or if we're doing renovation and additions, what is the percentage of that compared to the new construction? And then what you'll see also in blue, yellow, and orange, again, that's your prioritized repair column, renovations and additions in yellow, and then build new. So at Hopkins, what you'll see, prioritized repair, right, high, moderate, and additional priorities, that came out to 7.6 million, and that's 18.7% of your new build. Maybe I'll jump to the new build actually first, or before I talk about renovations and additions. So your new build, that's complete new construction, but that also includes your demolition, right? This is a turnkey cost that we're showing you. So it includes demolition, costs for portables if by chance they're needed during construction, any kind of site repairs or modifications that might be involved as well with that. So to design to that 800 capacity, as well as along with that blended learning pathway, the total cost came out to $40.6 million. And then renovations and additions. So looking at the floor plan, right, and trying to understand, okay, if you have X amount of classrooms currently, and you're trying to hit 800, but you're also trying to design these classroom neighborhoods maybe within the space, and taking into consideration what spaces simply can't possibly meet the need of students tomorrow, right? What we found is that you can, I think, renovate, plausibly renovate 40% and make it relevant space for learning in the future. And then you would build 60% as new, as well as site modifications. And so that cost, I know, and I'm gonna share this with you guys. I understand that there may be a little bit of sticker shock, I think, when it comes to the renovation and addition costs there, because they're very close. It came out to $40.3 million. Which is 99.3, essentially the same as building new. A couple things to consider as we're building these costs. There are additional soft cost fees that go into this. There are project contingencies for additions and renovations are more than what you would do for new build, because you got to figure that when you go in and start designing and start even beyond designing, there's existing conditions within buildings that you just simply may not know about, and so your contingency is higher as well. The design time for additions and renovations sometimes takes a little bit longer as well, and so there's a little bit more of escalation built into that too. So I just wanted to share with you, those are some of the kind of behind the scene considerations in terms of that total project cost that play into that. There's also, just thinking about this too, the renovation, right? You see that renovation is 40% and new build is 60%. So more new than renovation. But the cost that you would have to put into renovation is not, maybe what you might assume it's like 25 or 50% of the new construction. It's more like 80% if you're doing the type of renovation that's really needed in these buildings, and to kind of balance that, I guess, in terms of how is that possible? Just go back to the age of the buildings again. 67 years old with the original. So the type of modifications within the building warrant a renovation cost that's about 80% of your new construction cost. So that's kind of long-winded for Hopkins, but it's also an introduction to the numbers that we'll see moving forward here too. Mission Valley. So Mission Valley, you'll see, has an NA in the renovation and addition. Just to remind you of that campus, the original building was 83 years old. It's a smaller, much smaller campus. Current enrollment is, or the current potential capacity is 297 students, so much lower. And here you'll see the build new cost is for actually a capacity of 400. And so the build new is $23 million essentially, as opposed to the prioritized repair, which is 4.5 million. Now, we didn't do renovations and additions for this because it is a collection of buildings that are arranged on the site. They're not really connected other than overhead canopies, but with campuses this small, you very easily get to a point where you kind of, it's easy to point out that the value of, and I'm not even just talking about the dollar value, but just the value in education, right? What those spaces can provide do not offer much in terms of building an environment that would be conducive to learning in the future. And so that one was, with Mission Valley, it's fairly easy to say that if you're going to do anything there, we really need to build new. And the next is Shields. Shields is very much the same way. And I'll tell you, you might look at the age of this one and think about Shields in the floor plan if you're familiar with it. It's very much the old style of your traditional winged type campus. Shields is a little bit different than the other ones that we're looking at today because it was built with single loaded corridors, which isn't the worst thing in the world. Right, and when I say single loaded corridors, it means you have hallways that go down the wings that have classrooms only on one side. But each of those wings, there are several of them. There's a couple more in this one. And when you look at adding to it, it's very much the same thing as Mission Valley, where you say, once you put identify what needs to be new, then you kind of look at what you have in the existing to renovate and kind of question what kind of value it could bring to that new scenario. And so kind of like Mission Valley, it was pretty easy to say, very early on through programming, you say, I simply don't think that it's going to provide much value if you were to renovate. So that's all to say. For Shields, we are aiming for at 800 capacity, and the new construction is almost $40.7 million. Prioritized repair is 6.9, and which is about 70% or 17. I apologize, 17% of the new build. Again, Shields was originally 67 years old with the original construction. So Smith, again, looking at the age to start with, 62 years old at its oldest. Prioritized repair. So that came out to the $4.3 million, which is 10.6% of your new build. So your new build in orange there was $40.6 million. Again, we're aiming for an 800 student capacity. Renovations here, going back to that yellow column and looking at what spaces could be reutilized, what spaces would likely need to go. Your renovation cost there, or your renovation percentage, is 37% of the campus. So 37% of the campus stays. 63% of the campus would be new. And then you have site modifications as necessary. And that comes out to almost $36.9 million, about 90.9% of your new build. Okay, Patti Welder. So looking at the middle schools, again, age 59 at its oldest. Your prioritized cost was $9.8 million, that comes out to about 12.8% of your new build cost. And so this is where the price jumps up for middle school. We're aiming for a 1,200 student capacity at middle school. And so again, thinking about blended learning and when you think about your education pathways at the middle school level, and we're not talking about high school, today for sure, but when you think about going into your older students as they get older, you get, I guess, maybe you say a little bit more serious about or maybe serious isn't the right word, but some more real world situations, and you want to provide a little bit more of the spaces that meet the education pathways. And so when you talk about, let's say STEM labs, right, or blended learning areas, providing room for that collaboration and online learning that's outside of the classroom, those spaces get a little bit more, and you have a little bit more capacity to attend to as well. So new build is almost $76.5 million. Renovation. Now, thinking about the age of Patti Welder and the condition specifically of a lot of the buildings, what we identified was about only 19% of that building could serve as, could be renovated and serve as relevant spaces moving forward that would justify putting the dollars to it. And so we have a new build of 81% at that campus, and it does provide the site, being on a corner, it does provide good opportunity, we think, for building that 81%. And also phasing as well. I think we think that can be done, very strategically, so that we try to minimize the impact to students. But that renovation and addition cost with the 19% and 81% comes out to 74.5, almost $74.6 million. Again, almost the same as building new. And then the last one is Stroman, and Stroman Middle School, again, we're aiming for 1,200 students. You see the prioritized repair for Stroman. The age is 53 years old at its oldest, but the potential cost is much higher than what we saw before. So it's $26.3 million, about 33.5% of the new build construction cost, which you see we're putting at 78. Almost $78.7 million. Renovation at Stroman, we do think the side wings of Stroman can be reutilized and repurposed very well. There's actually a lot of good opportunity for those spaces, and so that, along with potentially the auxiliary gym and library, I think can be, or not the auxiliary gym, the current gym. Could be reutilized essentially. And so 70% of that building would be new construction, along with site modifications too. And so that potential cost comes out to almost $77.7 million. Again, 98.8%, which is very close to the build new scenario as well. And so this is a summary, just taking all of those costs, looking at prioritized renovation and building new. So you can see what all of those potential projects, renovations, additions, or new construction might look like.
So that was a ton of information. And I want to tell our task force that one, appreciate the work that Mike and Dan from Huckabee have been doing over the past 2 weeks, because we've asked them to take a lot of information from our team, our campus leadership team, in looking at potential renovation or new build estimates. So these estimates that you're seeing, they've been working on up to the minute. I had a lot of questions when I first saw this information. And so I had the privilege or the opportunity to sit down with Mike and Dan and spend some time talking through some of this. One of my initial questions, and Mike hit on it a little bit, was, oh, it catches me off guard that the renovation cost is that close to the build new cost. Like in my mind, in my world, that I struggle to understand that. So there may be that question or others that our task force has. So I'd like to make some space right now um, for you to ask any questions that you may have. Um, and we can go back and reference particular slides if you'd like. After we go through this part, we're going to be moving into a small group discussion, and I will send you some information via email. So if one or two of your um, small group members are able to access that, to have your hands on this information while you're in your small groups as well. But we want to just make a little space here for questions about this data that you may have.
I have a question. First of all, hello to everybody in the group. And my question is, and for me, when I look at numbers, I'm looking at numbers, and we're looking at the cost to build new, and these things. And even when I looked at the PDF, where it was like what was projected as an itemized cost. And so you have to forgive me too, because I guess because looking at budgets and looking at, the numbers and the nuts and bolts, I guess you say, of things. My question is, what are we comparing? What is this estimated project cost to build these things? Are we looking at past bidding processes? Are we looking at, are we taking in like the construction, companies? Because normally, even if you look at a bidding process for somebody to do a project, we take the, we look at the cost, where some come in high, some come in low, some come in, mid. And so what is the basis of this number as your formula that you're using, I guess I would say, that is covering the cost of the nuts and screws, if that makes sense. Does that make sense, Mike?
Yes, it does. So we pull from a database of construction costs from both around the state, and then also specifically around your region, which ties in with both San Antonio and Houston. So we do only Texas education, and we do a lot of it across the state, and so we pull from those the history that we've seen recently.
So would that be confidential information, or is that information that even the task force could be privy to seeing? Or I'm just asking. I don't know. I think that's more Dr. Bonewell right there. Question.
Well, I would want to share, and I know Dr. Hunt, there may have been a meeting or two that you weren't able to join us early on, where we did share out. I say we, the Huckabee team shared out statistics over the past year. I think the most recent data that's available in terms of average construction costs for schools per level, at the elementary level, at the middle school, and even at the high school, even though we're not really talking about high schools here locally right now, what those average costs were per square foot for the state of Texas, and then regionally in our region. So is that the type of information you're talking about, sir?
Well, it's going on the lines of because we talk about statistics, and then when we look at statistics, we know it's surveying and projects. But I'm saying, like, I didn't know if they were talking cahoots with the actual companies, actual construction companies to see, because right now we are looking at projected costs, and we are looking at, so that number could be lower or that number could be higher. We're looking at projected, and so that can be kind of scary when you're seeing 23 million, 40 million, and then for those that might build in the past or have done building in their past, they're like, okay, where's this number coming from? So that's why I was asking that.
Yeah, these numbers are developed from real projects that got bid, and again in your area. And when we do our projects as well, it's not just our projects. Actually, it's projects that have bid across the state too. So, but when we are doing projects like this, let's say in a design phase, we're having pretty close conversations with contractors if they happen to be involved during the design process. And so we have those relationships with contractors that allow us to get accurate information.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was kind of wondering the same thing. This is Justin Urbano, bouncing off of Dr. Hunt. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Yeah. I think something that kind of ties into what he was saying is, you know, I know the exact price of what I'm going to charge to build a shed. For example, you all have someone on your team that's like, no, that number looks correct, instead of just numbers guys who studied and looked at numbers but never had no hands-on experience with putting a bid in that would be like, hey, that looks normal. And I think kind of what Dr. Hunt was saying, you know, because when you get different contractors in there, you create competition, and then that could drive the price down or up.
Sure. No, it's a good point, Justin. I guess number one, to your question about, I guess, our staff, we do have a professional estimator. That's what he does, and he keeps tabs on the industry and you know, has those conversations with contractors. And we also have a construction side of our house that manages the construction end of the projects. They're also intimately aware of the construction costs, and so they'll work with our estimator too to make sure that we're current on those prices. I feel like there was a second part to your question there, and I may have lost it. Was there a second part to that one, Justin? I'm sorry.
No, I think we're all good. I think
Okay.
the last part I was just saying was how the competition through contractors drives the price up.
Yes. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. So I just wanted to point out, I think when we look at the bids of projects and develop our unit costs, you know, per square foot, essentially, it's based on the square footage of your buildings or buildings out there that might get bid, the total project costs, right? The bid that actually came in. But all of those, right, those bids are developed through that competition already. So I think the competition is built into the numbers that we're studying across the state.
Yeah, to piggyback on that, this is Dan with Huckabee. You know, the data that we get, you know, bids are you know, open record, you know, public record, but our data is based on the breakdown of the successful bid, which in our climate, it's not always the low bid, because sometimes you may get a bid that's so low that you know it can't be complete. But all it's based on the bid accepted, because from that bid we get the complete breakout of all those internal costs, so that we can get a good unit cost. As you know, Justin, there's so many things in construction that we don't know yet because these projects haven't been designed. So it's not down to a bid level because we don't know what the foundation type is yet. We don't know what the mechanical system type is yet. So our data is based on the average of those costs that are of commensurate projects in our area, throwing out the highs and the lows, because we know some districts will want a suspended foundation and a 4-pipe system that may not be appropriate everywhere. And some districts may want a pre-engineered metal building that, again, is not appropriate to use because those numbers are going to skew very high and very low. So this is a weighted average of bid projects, getting the data from the projects or from the bids that were actually accepted. You know, to your point though, you know, we are, and I just said it, you know, we can't bid these in the sense, or our estimates aren't constituted as bids, because again, we don't know all the details of the design and the exact systems and materials. So again, this is just a weighted average of very equivalent types of projects that have been bid to that level of detail. I hope that helps with some clarification and didn't make it even muddier.
No, that was really good.
Thanks, Dan.
Dale here. Just as you were providing us the ideas of renovation versus replacement, I was calculating your numbers. Comes up to be $300 million just on the replacement. Add another $80 million for fixing the things that are already problems. We're at 7.63 cents minimum increase just on the wish list, not including what we've already overtaxed at 7 cents per 100. That's a lot of money, folks. I'd love the advocate to do a report on a $400 million bond issue.
Were you on the task force for the Chandler or East or West? Mr. Zuck?
Yes, sir. No, sir. I was not on the task force for East and West. I'm just merely paying the taxes on it right now.
And so,
Well, would you want them to have continued to stay in Stanley Elementary opposed to Chandler, or in whatever school was before, Memorial High School?
Well, we still are in what's called Memorial High School. We're also still inside of Stroman High School. The pig in the poke that was passed to us is that both schools needed to be shut down because they were highly energy inefficient, and we're still looking at adding another $10 billion to Liberty.
Sounds familiar.
Yes, sir. So you can't, we'll just leave it there.
and I think this would be an appropriate time for me as your facilitator to reiterate the charge of the task force, and that is to analyze the data from a facilities assessment and to make recommendations about short, mid, and long-range facility planning. And so it is absolutely correct that this is a really large number when you look at if you were to renovate or rebuild these facilities. That's a very large number. The information that's being brought forth to the task force is generated through requests and questions from the task force. This is not the leadership team coming to ask you to approve rebuilding all of these facilities at this time. This is us providing this task force with information to assist the task force in the charge of prioritizing and developing short, mid, and long-range plans that you as community representatives of this task force believe our community will support. And so I would not want anyone on the task force to look at this data and make the connection to that data as an insinuation that the school district's here to ask you to rebuild all those facilities as a part of a short-term bond. That's absolutely not what's happening right now. We are going to definitely have small and large group discussion tonight, and we are going to have a series of meetings where you as the task force will be charged with prioritizing among all of these needs of these 50, 60, 70, 80-year-old buildings. What do you believe our community will support us doing? Do we have additional questions about the data that was shared before we move into our small group conversations?
Okay, so how many cents per million, would be per year again? Because I think that's the general question I'm getting from the community is, what exactly is that? I heard him mention like 1 cent per 100,000 per.
I'll go back to that slide, Justin, as soon as I figure out how to navigate my system here. I think it would be good to start on this slide here based on that question.
So I saw 1 cent gets 7 million, but is that 1 cent per year, 1 cent per month?
That's okay. Let me go to this question, this slide here. So Justin, on the far left-hand side, your property taxes are based on the value of the home. And so we've got three estimates here. If someone owned a home of 100,000, 150,000, or 200,000. And if the bond planning task force were to recommend a plan that had no tax rate impact or no tax rate increase, then the increase would be 0. And you'd have on the high end up to about $99.5 million of capacity to address identified needs. For every penny that you would consider potentially raising the tax rate, you're generating about $7.3 million in additional capacity. So if at no tax rate impact, you are able to generate about 100 million. On the far right-hand side, at the 4-cent tax rate increase, you would be generating about 128 million. And that increase would result in a monthly property tax increase of each of those amounts below the 4-cent, for example. So if you had a $100,000 home, it would be $3.33 more per month for your property taxes. About $37, $38 more per year. Be double that, about $70 if you had a $200,000 home. Does that make sense?
And what was the amount without no new schools, all just the renovations that they had put forward?
We're talking about just repairs?
Yes.
Okay, that's going to be this slide right here. And so you have high priority items, elementary, secondary support equates to an estimate of 111.6 million. And then you've got your moderate priority, an estimated total of 35.7. If you were to address all of those things on all of those facilities, you're looking at a total of 149 million, which is beyond any of the capacities that we have discussed here. So it's clear that there's going to have to be a prioritization process by this task force in determining what projects you believe the community could support and at what level.
And is there a list that says, like, just what's the most unsafe that just absolutely needs to be done, that, hey, that you just recommend can't be left out of the bond? You know, have you?
So when you look at this slide that's in front of you, some of those items were identified at the internal district level as high priority items. Some were identified as moderate. After task force input, a few of those that the district leadership team identified as moderate were requested to be moved to high. So those were the items that, before you address anything about instructional functionality of the building, are concerns for those facilities that were assessed. We're talking roofs, HVAC, electrical, plumbing, things of that nature. I want to make sure we are building space for the small group discussion, and we can continue to have additional questions, and we'll want to make time for that. But we do need to make sure that we make time for you guys to go into small group and discuss these questions that we are going to ask you to discuss here tonight. Based on the cost information presented, number one, what campuses, if any, do you believe should be renovated? Number two, what campuses, if any, do you believe should be rebuilt? And three, what additional information do you need to make informed recommendations? As I mentioned, when I send you into the breakout groups, I'm also going to send you an email with that data that we just discussed. If someone has the ability to access that through the conversation, it will be helpful to the group. but we want to make sure we provide time for you to go into those discussions. Based on our number of participants, I have broken it down into a total of 6 breakout rooms. And so I'm going to go ahead and move you guys with those questions now. And I just want to reiterate before I send you, what campuses, if any, do you believe should be renovated? What campuses, if any, do you believe should be rebuilt? And what additional information do you need to make informed recommendations?
Great. Thank you.
Okay, okay. And I mean, I don't mind reporting out this time. I know Dale reported out, I think in our first group meeting, small group meeting. And if anyone, no one wants to step forward and take on that responsibility, I'll do it, but I'm gonna offer it up in case Dr. Kano or someone feels, and I know, like I said, I know Ashley did already, so I don't mind reporting out.
No, I don't mind reporting out. That's fine.
You don't mind reporting out?
Nope, I'll take notes and report out.
Thanks so much.
You bet.
And so the first question that we're considering is what campuses, if any, should be renovated? And you know, I'm sure there are a lot of things we can take into consideration, but let's bounce that one around. And I'm certain that age of the facilities and how functional they are in our times that we're trying to educate kids today. A building built 60 years ago, I would guess would have some challenges that would have to be addressed. So is age one of the considerations we'll be looking at? And I don't want to really lead the discussion. I sure like for this to be a very open discussion where everyone's, you know, participating.
Well, I guess I got a question for maybe you, Dr. or maybe Greg. You know, Greg sent out an email associated with that summary sheet, and it had 4 elementaries and then 2 middle schools.
Right.
So fundamentally, is that what the district is kind of targeting out of the list that we heard through tonight?
Great question. Great question, Jeff. Thank you for asking that, because I think it's important we clarify. Those 6 campuses were actually requested members at our last meeting that we come back and provide estimates for renovation and rebuild costs. Specifically Mission Valley because of its age and what was the estimated cost to just address the priority identified items compared to potential rebuild. And the other campuses based on the new pathways and those new programs that are going to be offered at those campuses. So those were not district identified, hey, we want the task force to look at these. They were actually requested from task force members that we bring that data.
Okay.
Now, dude, I would tell you that it makes a lot of sense. As a district member of the district leadership team, every one of those campuses makes sense for this group to discuss as a task force.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Would it be helpful if everybody, for us to share it, pull it up to look at as a group? Would you all like to do that?
That'll be fine.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. Okay. Does everyone see it there?
Yes.
Okay, that's Hopkins, okay. And so,
certain things, you know. Uh-oh, he didn't walk in. But
Glad you're talking.
so you know that's just concern, I guess, because also when you look at it, for me, when I'm looking at it, I want to know what my money, because at the end of the day, we're paying for it.
Yeah.
So it's like I want to know what my money is getting me. You know, I'm not, you know, if a car salesman say, hey, man, I got this Porsche for you, you know, and it has all this, I want to know what's the engine. I want to know what's, you know, what I'm paying, what I'm literally paying for, you know. And so that's the aspect. So how many minutes do we have? And Brother Adam, you know I nominate you to be the spokesperson, right?
I don't know.
You're so good at it. You're eloquent at it.
We haven't even started answering the questions. When I do the spokesperson thing, you guys might not like my answers. So,
You guys
Mr.
have
Bo,
yes.
how much time do we have? I was going to let you answer that.
You've got a good 18 minutes.
Wow. Okay. So I think we probably should get into the meat and potatoes of the three questions and then go off on our tangents, as I know we will. You know, the first one was, which ones do we think we should renovate and not?
Yeah.
While I have a smaller audience in here, I will tell you, FW Gross is a sore spot for me and many people because we did merge that school several years ago when I was doing a kind of information tour around my campus and other people that I interact with. When I kind of told them what schools, and the second I said FW Gross to a couple of them, they said, why do we need the capacity? We shut it down because we didn't need the capacity. And when you look at $5.3 million possibly being spent on renovating it, plus the carrying costs yearly and how much it's going to cost us year after year for staff and services, it's kind of an interesting point. So I can tell you it was surprising me how fast, and I guess it's people who knew me 2 years ago that kind of brought that up, and I think they were kind of sticking me in the ribs with it. So we're going to open up FW Gross again. So I have a hard time looking at FW Gross as being a priority.
Adam, I'm sorry to interrupt. Can I address it?
Right.
Because I think it'll be important not only for this group discussion, but also if people watch this at some point out in the community and see this conversation. So FW Gross is not one of the campuses that we are asking the task force to consider at this point. And specifically because, yes, there are conversations right now about potential early childhood programming at that campus in the future. However, part of that programming and part of that potential partnership brings with it the potential possibility for funding to address facility needs. So with all the other needs that we have across our campuses, right now that does not make sense to prioritize given the situation there.
Well, I kind of was thinking that I love the program, but I don't like necessarily the campus. I guess I think of it like, could we do it more of a P-Tech type program as a school within a school if we're going to spend money potentially on a Shields Elementary, which is a little bit more central, or a Smith Elementary to do a massive redo? Could we roll it into one of those campuses instead of going to laying out any capital? Because at some point, even though we'll have funding, what cost will be ours for long term for staffing and maintaining that building? That was kind of the point I was trying to make, and what others were asking me about as well. So as far as Dr. Hunt, as far as priorities, what do you see as far as rebuild versus renovate? Are there things that pop out at you?
The rebuild was the second question.
That would spread the wealth widely to introduce those programs for the path.
But even at the 22 cents, that was what, 100 million? So, I mean, you're still not even covering all the other. You're just maybe catching all your priority, the 111 million total, and that's it. You're not even getting it into the other. And that's for 29 years.
Get there.
Greg, we got a problem.
We clearly have a lot of facility needs, and they didn't happen overnight.
Yeah, of course.
And we're not looking to create a plan that's going to fix them all tomorrow, right? Part of the, I had this, what I'm going to assume is a similar feeling to what I am envisioning you're feeling right now, which is, gosh, I want to do something for everybody and fix all of this right away. And so that's why I want to be mindful to make sure that the task force has in mind that not only are we looking at short-range plans and what you believe the community can support now, but also looking at mid and long-range plans, because we recognize we have more need than we're able to address completely in the short term.
But the biggest problem is, even if, you know, to do the most, you'd have to go 29 years. And that means that debt is still there for 29 years. So when you want to do a long range plan, are we saying 30 years from now? You know,
Well,
see, that's where I have an issue, is we got issues that we need to address in 5 years and in 10 years.
and so there's a few things fundamentally that impact your capacity moving forward, right? These estimates are assuming no property growth for an extended period of time. That's not really, we hope, that's not the situation we're in. We know we've had times when our property has either declined in value or not moved much, but over a period of time, you expect that trend to continue to grow. The other thing that we need to recognize is that when we work with our financial advisor as a school district, part of the structuring of that debt is that there is a time frame within there that tax rate is programmed to move down and to build capacity, recognizing that we have additional mid and long range needs that are going to occur. So we have a few different variables that allow for us to have mid and long range plans. Francis, has somebody posed the question?
We have,
Okay.
and
I just want to make sure y'all have opportunity to talk about the question at hand too. When I ask
no, we have.
Reno versus replace versus additional needs or additional information needs.
Yes, sir. I'm gonna leave you guys to talk. I'm gonna jump in another room. Thank you.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, you're the spokesperson.
Tear down the rest of the academic building outside of the addition, tear down the dead zone and build back all the functions we need there, the classrooms, the gymnasiums, you know, just whatever function. I know life skills is in that area. And all the while that footprint is much smaller than the existing. So the existing gyms could remain intact during construction just to have that functionality. And then once that's done, you have more of a horseshoe shape that wraps the corner of the intersection. And then the gym could be torn down to, right when we measured it, from one end of the building to from the western end of the building to the end of the gym is like 770 feet. And so we're looking at trying to compact it and get it all under one roof. But again, that's how we looked at it in terms of how best to manage, you know, the construction costs for renovation scope and figuring out, you know, the least impact on student disruption, being able to build back portions on unoccupied portions of the site so that we can then demo portions that would be deemed unusable for renovation. And again, that would probably take 3 major construction phases, which our estimations are probably about 2 years worth of construction total, from breaking ground to going through all 3 phases to the end. But at the end of the day, then that ornamental front entry would become the front entry to Patti Welder, not the entry that's just to the east of that. We would actually build a little bit, we're proposing, again, this is all hypothetical, just, you know, how Mike and I figured it out, build a little bit of a plaza entry and push the parking a little bit to the east, basically in front of what is the older portion of the academic wing. Instead of the parking lot right in front because it's so congested. So we could actually provide a little bit of a loop drive for parent drop-off, visitor parking, and then provide the accessibility requirements we would need. The first floor level is so much higher than the grade at the street, you know, with all those steps. So that would give us the opportunity to ramp up in that plaza area and not make it look so utilitarian, and actually make it part of that. Again, it's not fully designed by any means, but, you know, Mike and I are looking at it from just, again, diagrammatic ideas and processes on how to get there.
Dan, I want to make sure we've got about 10 more minutes that the group is talking about all 3 questions specific to all 6 campuses that we discussed. Awesome. I want to make sure that you guys have an opportunity to share out with the group around those questions.
Yeah. So as far as the elementary schools, you know, again, same thing. Mike and I looked at what portions of the buildings, you know, obviously you've got the core portions of the buildings that are generally under the same roof, and then you've got those additions over time that are separated with just covered canopies. So we've looked at how.
What do you feel about that?
Yeah, it's,
Okay.
That's fine. But
yeah, you could probably estimate it probably around 20 million. Probably is a good shot.
We were talking about if it's going to cost as much as it does, you know, we're within $300,000 in some cases, Greg, just go for new. And we feel that Stroman and Hopkins, especially being on the south side of town, they deserve something to be proud about. Mission Valley obviously is outgrown. That's what the comment when you came in, we were speaking specific of Mission Valley, that the Mission Valley campus it's past its useful life. That's just not how our world works anymore. We need something that's safer for our children. But mainly, and David's concern was, what would it be if we built to our current capacity instead of increasing? So maybe in the floor plan, if we build new, we build with the thought that we're going to add on this wing here when we have to have 700 more students at a school or 200 more students at a school or something along those lines that we don't project is going to happen for another 10 to 15 years.
And so thank you very much. You guys have been, I've been popping into the groups. You're one of the most focused around the questions. So I really appreciate that. Facilitator. And you know, that's when we ask question number 3 about what additional information do you need in prioritization. That's potentially something that we can ask for Huckabee to work with us to come back with estimates if there's a particular facility where perhaps the task force wants us to look at a capacity that's where we are exactly right now, or versus a midterm addition down the line to that facility. Yeah, I think we'd have to weigh as a task force, you know, building to the exact size and some of the risk that might be inherent with that.
Mm-hmm.
But yes, that is something that we could work on additional information if that's a request of the task force.
Mr. Bonewald, I'd just like to say, above all, I just want, you know, I'd like to see options, if that makes sense. You know, I'd like to see, like I had messaged you about, what about a tech center, or what about a STEM center here, or something like that. You know, that's what I'd like to see, because it's just this or that right now, opposed to.
So,
yes.
Justin, one of the things I want to make sure that I reiterate is in the process of designing facilities for renovation or rebuild, there's a portion of that responsibility that lies upon the district leadership team, the campus leadership team, to identify space and learning spaces that would be necessary to implement that programming in an effective and efficient way. And that's really not the charge of this task force. You know, we do break down what is considered the complex versus the complicated. And, you know, that is an expertise that parts of our school district, and working with experts who plan facilities, are working around. And so specifically, they've spent hours working with members of campus leadership teams to look at the needs for implementing the programming that's coming into the campuses that were brought forward, with the exception of Mission Valley. That's not a part of those new pathways. And so I can tell you, I'm sitting in and listening to conversations between this architectural group who's working to provide us with estimates, and principals and directors about these are spaces that would be necessary to effectively implement programming. And so it's down to the specificity of per campus, the type of programming that's being planned. That is when we talk about the task force asking for, well, we'd like to see a STEM center at this campus, or we'd like to see this program offered as an add-on building at this campus. I don't mean this to be non-helpful or argumentative or anything like that. It's just not a part of the task of the task force. Does that make sense, Justin?
Well, it doesn't, because here we're talking about doing maintenance, renovation, or new school. So is this new school designed to the things that they're going to teach at this school and implement, or this is just, you know what I mean? I'm interested in this stuff. I'm in here to get what's best for the people that I'm fighting for. You know what I mean? And it's not like saying that that's not our job. Hey, my job is to sit here and I'm going to tell you exactly what I feel we need there. Or if we can't get a new school, then what else can we get? You know, what else is going to be put down there as an investment into our community, which hasn't been in so long. So I understand you have these professionals and all this, but it's been a while since those professionals have been professional and put our side of town on something good. So that's just what I was trying to do here when I'm asking about the STEM center or the whatever centers, because if we don't get a new school, then we're just going to get what you just previously had talked about, and that was just the maintenance. And I think that's what they've been getting previously, is just maintenance. So, but I understand what your point of view was as well.
Well, and I don't mean that those thoughts aren't important. What I mean is, as a part of a effective planning process, with 30-something, 40 task force members, it would be challenging to go program campus by campus based on an interest of a task force member here, a task force member there. We can do that. It's going to be an extended runway to do that. Now, to just make sure that I'm clearly conveying the process so far, when we're looking at these renovation and rebuild conversations, it's the campus principals, it's these folks from Huckabee have sat down with the campus leadership teams at these campuses to talk about what they are seeing and what they need at those campuses. So it is coming from the people on the ground at those campuses.
Oh, and I'm also on the ground at those campuses. You've probably seen me in photos at the events and things at some of these campuses. I'm on the ground. And what I'm saying is, if we get gypped out of a new school because of high numbers, well, I want to know what else is there going to be offered. That's why I'm saying they're going to see these high numbers, the community, which all of it votes on. And then it's like, okay, well, then let's just stick to the maintenance then. You know, and I'm sorry, but that's not good enough. And that's what I'm trying to say.
And that voice is really important, that you share that with this task force, because these walking out of this task force, whenever this task force work concludes with recommendations, those are going to be recommendations of the task force. They're not going to, and you're going to be a part of that voice. They're not going to be Greg's recommendations or the district leadership team's recommendations. We're providing you with the data, and you as a task force with the data to come to some sort of consensus around recommendations when we recognize we have more need than we have resources at this time.
Greg, is it possible, you know, we've talked to the principals and those people that are on those campuses. So obviously they have a plan, it may be a broad-based plan. Is that possible to have that published on the VISD website to say what our plan looks like for each of those campuses?
So there's a challenge in this process, we're talking about conceptual, right? We're talking about estimations of, based on the types of learning spaces that are being identified as needed, and based on current expected costs, building in some understandable potential escalation of cost. But we are not at the point where we've engaged or hired engineers, architects to actually design a facility to where we can say, here's what it would look like. That's in the process. And that's a hard part, right? That's a hard part for the task force. It's a hard part for me, that I want to come to you and tell you, here's exactly what it looks like and here's exactly what it costs. But there's a cost to that. And that doesn't happen in a bond planning process until the community says, we will support this. We have estimated costs, but we don't have exact facilities designed. Guys, I'll give you 2 more minutes and then pull everybody back in to share out, okay? Thank you for your discussion. Thank you. Okay, I think we may have everyone back in now. Before I ask the groups to share out, I want to just describe a little bit of my experience in bouncing around to the 6 rooms. In the prior meetings, I will tell you that I felt like as I moved through the meetings, there was sort of this either very similar conversation happening or sort of a consistent vibe from group to group. And this is, to use an analogy, the part in the process where we have moved from simple arithmetic to a much more complex part of the process. And I saw some levels of frustration. I saw some levels of passion. I saw some levels of how do we do everything that we want to do when we realize the numbers tell us we probably can't do everything we want to do right now. And it's going to get harder before it gets easier. So we're really getting into the very difficult conversations of the complex that is the reason we have task force work. And so I want to lead with that, and that there's not a right or a wrong that's obvious, and that's why we go through this process in decision making as an organization. And I saw some of what I experienced to potentially be assumptions based on the material that were shared, in that those were pieces of information that were being brought forward because the district's hoping that you say yes to this or that. Again, want to be mindful that all of the information that has been generated up to this point, since we provided with the task force with district identified high and moderate priority items, every piece of information that's been generated since that point has come out of requests for more information from the task force. And so all this information that we have to make sense of and ultimately prioritize, that there's not a right or wrong answer. This isn't not a test where we know we have the key over here and we're waiting for you to get to it. We're working together on this, and it's not going to be easy. With that said, do I have a brave soul who would like to be the first group representative to share out around those questions of what, if any, campuses you believe we should consider for renovation or rebuild? And what additional information do you need?
I'll go for group.
Thank you, Dana.
We talked about specifically Stroman, Hopkins, and Mission Valley, and with the possible renovation versus new build being so close, it just makes more sense to go with new build. That being said, that's also a very high price tag, but that's also on if we increase the capacity. What if we stayed with the current capacity that we have, with the exception of Mission Valley, because it's growing over there? And when we design this building, make it where we can add on to it in 15 years if we need to, instead of building for the future when that future may be 20 years out. And if we have a very conservative voter base, we have a very conservative community, what if this dollar figure is too high for our taxpayers to do all these new bills? We've built a lot of new stuff for the north side, and the south side hasn't gotten anything new. And so if we can't get a new Stroman or Hopkins or both, what can the south side possibly get? Is that right, Justin and David and Josh? Okay.
You got it.
Thank you very much, Dana, for sharing out on behalf of your group.
Thank you.
Okay, so group one, I'll jump in here. We had kind of similar thought process with a couple exceptions. We talked about Stroman being a replacement for certain for the south side. We kind of focused more on Shields Elementary because it's a centrally located campus and it's probably one of the easier ones to actually do a rebuild on for one of the grade schools because it's got a lot of land next door to it that we own. We did say Mission Valley, again, because of the growth on the north side of town, would be the third priority. We're on the same point that we would like to see most of the rest, if we could get the community to get on board and increase off of what we're talking about currently for dollar amounts, to see the campus priority items all be addressed and the secondary priority items to be addressed as well. Which I think if you take out those school comes up to about $111 million. So we're just, again, because we are a conservative town, it's making sure we get the buy-in from the community. And it was brought up by one of our members, the teachers need to be on board and vote, because that's a very large voting block there, that if once we get the teachers and we get the staff members on board to see the benefits, that we could get a bond passed with the support of all VISD employees. So those are our thought process.
Thank you, Adam, for sharing on behalf of your group. Do we have another volunteer?
I'll jump in with group number 4. We looked at Greg's email that he sent to all the different rooms as far as 4 elementaries and the 2 middle schools, as far as tasking that conversation within the group. We had a lot of dialogue associated with the schools and the locations associated with them, as far as Shields, Hopkins, Mission Valley, as far, we just really dig through collectively, and I ran out of ink trying to take notes. A lot of open discussion and the dollar value associated to it, and some of the confusion as far as really we're not tasked necessarily with the dollars, but more out of those 6, what would be rebuilt to determine what would be short, medium, long-term goals collectively. We had that kind of conversation, but I think at the end we were talking about rebuild on Shields and Stroman. And one member talked about, combining Shields into Crane or in the new build, and then Patti Welder into Stroman as part of that consolidation effort. That would make a middle school of 2,400 kids, but that's something else. And then Mission Valley, maybe a renovation, or one group, several individuals, maybe more information for Mission Valley. So I turn it over to Ashley or Megan or Dale. How bad did I get off the train?
I see some thumbs up for you, Jeff. Thank you very much. Who's next?
I'll speak for group 2. we need more information. I know right now we've got information of what 4 cents roughly is $28 million more on some rough calculations. And so right now we're talking about just to get $128 million for 29 years, you're already talking about 26 cents for INS rate. To just cover the 149 million, you're already talking about up to 7 or 8 cents more. So you're talking about 30 cents just to cover the rentals that we discussed. So if you're going to start replacing buildings, you know, versus just renovating, it could cost definitely a lot more because it was $200 million there. So roughly 1 penny, 7 million, we will be over 50 cents rate. So we do have issues there. So I think we need some calculations on one, what really would the tax rate be to just cover what we have? What would it be to maybe to replace some of these buildings like we were talking about? And also it came up, it'd be nice if we could really cut down the time period. So what if it was only 10 years to do things? What would that rate be? And then with the long range plan, do all these replacements in 10 years with another bond issue. But it'd be nice to see some numbers there, what the rate would be at those different points, so we can look at what we can get ourselves out of the hole now, 5 years from now, get the next step going, and then 5 to 10 years after that, do more replacement. And it may even be good at one campus at a time, because if you're doing this pathways, in 3 years, the community will see it. It's going to be a successful program. That will be a big plus to replace campuses at that point as well. So I think it's at this point, though, is looking at some dollar figures. What would those rates be before we actually step forward?
Mr. Deezer, I want to make sure I understand your question, because part of our responsibility is to make sure we're responsive to the additional information that the task force needs. When you say dollar figures, so we've brought to the task rate. So we've brought to the task force up to this point what could be generated at the current rate, and then 1, 2, 3, and 4 cents. Are you saying bring additional revenue generation at additional cents above 4 cents?
What would the rate have to be to cover the $149 million?
Okay.
What would it be if we added on replacement of 2 campuses versus that? What would that tax rate have to be?
What we can do is we can bring you a graduated stair step into continuum of various tax rates and what would be generated by those rates. Ultimately, part of the charge of the task force is to determine what can our community support from that perspective, and then whatever that amount is, whether it be no increase or whatever amount this group determines, what do we want to prioritize as a task force to use those funds to address?
And that's correct. I have to agree, because right now we're saying at the current rate, we're talking about 100 million. Yet we have priority saying 149 million. So we're not even covering what we even said we need to replace. So
and sorry to cut you off there, I apologize. I do want to, we haven't talked about this, and I'm going to be very brief because of time, but there will be some offset in that of that total amount for priority. If the task force determined to renovate or rebuild a campus, a part of that 111 million that lives within high priority right now would be subtracted off, because that would inherently be addressed in renovation or rebuild.
Yeah, and I was doing that when I was looking at 2 campuses.
Okay, great.
Yeah,
good deal. I think we have one more group to share out.
All right. Well, I don't know if we're the one group, but hi, I'm from group 5. And we did not have any like real solid conclusions at all. We just had a lot of discussion. And I think one thing that a few of us were thinking is we might just have to kind of come at it from the angle, and I'm sorry, sir, I didn't catch your name. But, you know, to have the kind of the total amount that we think that our neighbors and friends will be able to approve, and then look at that box and say what can fit into this. And I know that it's really stinks to kind of think about money whenever you're really trying to sometimes think with your heart and what's best for kids, but that might just be the way that we're going to have to handle this. And so that's kind of what came out of our group. We didn't really have any good conclusions on what to renovate or replace. Sorry.
This is not a simple conversation, and it's why we built in, from this point forward, we will continue to respond to additional information requests, and we've got a few here tonight, but the vast majority of our work from this point forward, beyond that, will be working as a team to determine exactly what you just said, Bethany, and what Mr. Deeser said. Did I miss a group? I think we got them all. I have 2 slides to share with you, and then we'll be done. I apologize, we're going to go over by just a couple of minutes. One thing that I want to make sure that this group is aware of is that we are tonight sending out through our media here locally and through our district website a community thought exchange. So one of the great things about the work that we've done up to this point is you have been out there sharing with people. Our media has been a great partner in sharing that this bond planning task force work is happening. And so we are getting contacted from community members outside of our task force group. And one of the questions we've had is, while we're not serving on the task force, we do have thoughts and we want to have an avenue to share those. We may not know a task force member to share them directly to be brought back. And so one of our responses to that is to make sure that we do everything we can to get as much community input through this thought exchange process as possible. We're opening it tonight, and it will remain open until the Sunday after Thanksgiving. We will then have our next task force meeting on December 1st. And so we will bring back information from that community thought exchange. One of the things that I want to challenge the task force members to do and ask for your help as ambassadors is to share out this link. I will email it to you. Each of you have a sphere of influence and friends and colleagues, and I would ask that those that are Victoria residents, that you share this thought exchange link with them and let them know you're working as a member of this group, and encourage them. Let them know we want their voice. So often we hear, hey, I don't know how to get my voice out there. This is one of the ways. So I'm going to ask that our task force members help us to get that voice out there so we can bring it back from a broader community perspective to you. And hopefully that will help to some degree with your prioritization process. Lastly, we do not meet next week, the week of Thanksgiving. We will meet the following Tuesday, December 1st. We also already have a December 8th meeting scheduled, but you'll notice I've got some Christmas colors there, and I'm asking this task force to save the date of that following Tuesday, December 15th, because we may need that day to continue this prioritization process. We recognize we've got some challenging conversations ahead and some difficult decisions as a task force ahead. And we also have some time frames that limit us. And so we may potentially, probably likely, will need that December 15th meeting to continue this work forward, and hopefully potentially come to some consensus around recommendations by that December 15th meeting. If we come to recommendations sooner, fantastic. But I want to ask you to save that date of that following Tuesday as well. Topics for next week's meeting: respond to the task force information requests, questions you've just asked us. We will do that. We will share that thought exchange data, and we will begin further conversations around project prioritization. I just want to reiterate again our appreciation, my personal appreciation, ours as a school district. You have chosen to be a part of a tough task. And we are entering the tougher part of that. And it's going to be very important that each of you have your voice in that. I can't stress enough how important these next 3 weeks of meetings are. So if there is any way possible for you to be in attendance at each of these, I sure hope you can, because we're going to be doing important work that's going to build upon each other each and every week, these last 3 weeks particularly. With that, thank you very much. I appreciate a few additional minutes and want to wish you a peaceful, restful, thankful Thanksgiving. Thank you.